Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show on this Tuesday, June 15th, 2021. And boy, we've enjoyed, some areas have had some really warm weather this past few days. Some places hitting and exceeding 80 degrees for the first time this season. And as always, if you'd like additional weather information, there's plenty online. You can go to weather.gov/Alaska. If you want to go and find a recorded phone forecast, you can try 1-800-472-0391. Well, we have no particular advisories, watches, or warnings currently in effect across the state, but there are some areas of interest. More importantly, though, with the warm and drier weather that has occurred, especially up through the mid-upper Yukon Valley there in the east central areas of the state, including the Tanana Valley, there is a higher fire danger risk there, especially to the around Fort Yukon, the Yukon Flats area. And as we have seen temperatures now reach into the 80s, in fact, it hit 81 degrees so far up there at Dead Horse near the Arctic coast, and that is a type of reading you don't see every year, maybe every other 2 or 3 summers. So that's some really warm weather to report. And we're still just under now a week away from the summer solstice. Meanwhile, though, across southeast areas of the state, it's been a wet one. Juneau received due to this easterly wave. And if you look at that on the satellite image, you see those brighter clouds over the southeast panhandle there in the vicinity when it starts out there. Juneau picked up 43/100ths of an inch of rain between 1 and 2 a.m. this morning, and they're on their way to setting a daily rainfall record for June 15th, now exceeding 1.4 inches of rainfall. And that moisture and energy is working its way westward and will move across the southeast quarter of the states and the south central areas, bringing showers and some embedded thunderstorms tomorrow, especially south of the Alaska Range with that feature, and then north of the Alaska Range there could also be some isolated storms up around, and especially southeast of Fairbanks, up around Northway. So keep that in mind. Otherwise, back to the west, you'll see cloud cover. Utqiagvik down through the west side of the state. That's a weakening frontal boundary that's kind of just washing out as a trough. And at the bottom of your screen, you can see kind of a curl in the clouds there, southwest of the Gulf of Alaska, and also back toward the east and central Aleutians, as a couple areas of low pressure are working their way through those regions. We'll be able to show you that on the surface weather map. But otherwise, the south central interior has enjoyed a lot of sunshine over the weekend and warm temperatures. Many areas in the 70s, and the Matsu Valley could very well see temperatures back up around or a bit above 80 degrees come the day tomorrow, Wednesday. And a quick check again, looking at the satellite images, you can see that easterly, those waves working east to west across from the southeast panhandle there up toward Yakutat, and that's all spreading eastward. Now today, we continue to see weak thermal low up over the east central areas, and then back to the south and west, you'll see those couple of areas of low pressure in the north Pacific, with a trough extending up into the west coast, which is just the remnants of a weakening front, and then another system way out in eastern Russia. And for later tonight, early Wednesday morning, we'll continue to see a few scattered showers there in the southeast, back through the southeast panhandle, and a weak area of high pressure extending from the Arctic coast with some patchy fog down to the Seward Peninsula, and then also a weak ridge of high pressure nudging up there in through the southeast panhandle, Haida-Gwaii, and those areas of low pressure staying out there out over the northern Pacific. So Wednesday, we are looking for some isolated thunderstorms to pop up with the daytime heating, especially on the south slope of the Alaska Range as well as north side. And a few of those storms could produce some hail along with some lightning strikes, so keeping an eye on that, especially in the drier areas up toward the Yukon River. Weak high pressure remains there in the southeast as well as on the Arctic coast and near Norton Sound. And for Thursday, we're going to continue to see a possibility of some scattered showers and isolated storms across the interior. And temperatures, not just Wednesday but into Thursday, could still be well into the 70s, with a few lower to maybe even mid-80s being the case there, especially places that are normally warmer like Fort Yukon and Eagle Village. So looking at low temperatures for your Wednesday morning, the inner waterways generally in the mid-upper 40s, And extending westward, we'll see lows around 50 degrees, Anchorage on up toward Talkeetna, Glen Allen, McGrath. Highs tomorrow will be up into the 70s there, McGrath, and 77 degrees. The inner waterways of the southeast generally around or just a tad above 60, and then also generally in the 50s along the Kenai into Kodiak. And then low temperatures for Thursday morning will generally be mid-40s to around 50 degrees across the southeast and south central areas, with high temperatures a bit cooler with the cloud cover from that wave working its way westward across south central areas. Highs will generally be kept low to mid-60s at best, with coastal areas in the mid-upper 50s. And then along the Arctic coast, low temperatures overnight will generally be above freezing, around or above 50 degrees through the Yukon Valley. And look at that, Wednesday afternoon, 84, the forecast high at Fort Yukon, 82 at Eagle Village. And then along the coast, readings there could be still around 50 degrees along the immediate Arctic coast, with 40s there in the western Seward Peninsula. Lows generally above freezing, mid-upper 30s along the Arctic coast Thursday morning, lower to mid-50s the Yukon River, and mid-30s to around 40 degrees out across the Seward Peninsula. And high temperatures on Thursday could still hit 82 there at Fort Yukon, with many 70s there throughout the Yukon Valley. 40s to near 50 degrees along the Arctic coastline, as well as the Bering side there of the Seward Peninsula. And then for the southwest, temperatures will generally be in the 40s for overnight lows, and then during the day tomorrow, as you can see, as you go up the Yukon River and the Kuskokwim rivers, you're going to see temperatures well into the 70s. And cooler readings once you extend out into the waters either side of the Pacific or the Bering, with highs generally in the lower 50s extending off the Alaska Peninsula, and upper 40s to near 50 in the Aleutian Chain. And as we look through Thursday morning, lows will generally be in the 40s, some lower 50s there on the interior of the southwest, and then highs a little cooler with some cloud cover working its way west with one of those waves. Highs should generally be confined to the 60s across the southwest interior, coastal areas 50s, especially down across the Alaska Peninsula, and then in the upper 40s to around 50 degrees extending out across the Aleutian Chain. And the temperature outlook for June 21st through the 25th after the solstice, we're expecting temperatures to average a bit above normal across the state, especially through west central areas. And so far we've seen that trend and pattern that happened here to bring us our first 80-degree readings here within the last few days. That was forecasted well for east central areas about a week ago. And then precipitation should average a bit below normal across the southeast and east central areas, with slightly above normal precipitation across the western third of the state. So summer is in full swing, and as we build toward the solstice now, just less than a week away, as well as the full strawberry moon of the month of June.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, it's aviation weather time, and if you are planning a flight through this midweek Wednesday into Thursday, we have a large area of high pressure sitting over the interior of Alaska, bringing light winds. And then around it, we do have a couple of weak waves that'll be working its way across the northern waterways and through the south central coast areas. And then back out over the Bering, a lot of marine cloudiness there, marine layer causing a lot of stratus and lower clouds. But IFR conditions will generally be confined off the Arctic coast, as well as off the west and northwest coast, extending out through the Aleutian Chain, and then up along coastal areas of the northern Gulf. And by Wednesday afternoon, there will be the potential of isolated to scattered thunderstorms, some of which could be on the strong side between the Yukon River and the Alaska Range and eastern and central areas of the interior. Some of these storms will produce frequent lightning, some heavy downpours, larger hail, and perhaps even some gusty winds. And then as we head into Thursday morning, still IFR conditions off the Arctic coast and off of the Seward Peninsula, and then back down along the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula and out over portions of the Gulf, and especially up into Cook Inlet and around the Kenai and Kodiak Islands. Thunderstorms, isolated thunderstorms, again, there'll be that potential along and just north of the Yukon River, especially up there through the Yukon Flats and just south of the spine of the Brooks Range and north of the Alaska Range. And looking at past conditions, AKwx should enjoy VFR conditions throughout the day on Wednesday, as will Attican. And heading further south and west, Lake Clark and Merrill will also see VFR conditions throughout the day on Wednesday, and rounding up through the at least western and northern parts there of the Alaska Range. We are looking for VFR conditions at Rainy Pass as well as Windy Pass. Isabel Pass could start to see some thunderstorms, especially north entrance and out as you burst out there into more of the flatlands. Yes, there could be some scattered thunderstorms. Some of them could be on the stronger side. Same thing with Mentasta, some thunderstorms likely on the north side, and VFR conditions should hold through the day. Tanita, VFR becoming MVFR as conditions will be not as good as you get down toward the coast. And then at Portage, I think the west entrance should generally hold with MVFR conditions during the day on Wednesday, but IFR conditions in the east entrance, including Prince William Sound. And then the northern inner waterways up there to Chilkoot and White Passes, we are looking at IFR conditions throughout Wednesday. Freezing levels are generally above 8,000 feet across much of the mainland of Alaska, around or a bit below 6,000 feet across the southeast panhandle, and then back out toward the central Aleutians. We're looking at some areas around and below 6,000 feet. Potential for icing will exist above 10,000 feet across portions of the northern Gulf of Alaska and through the southeast, and then above 12,000 feet off the tip of the Alaska Peninsula, and an area above 8,000 feet in the far western Bering Sea. Upper level jet stream winds, we have a few weak low pressure circulations, one south of the Gulf of Alaska, the other North Pacific south of the Alaska Peninsula, and then way out toward the western Bering, out toward off the Russia coast. And then across the interior, winds out of the east-southeast through the Yukon Valley at 30,000 feet, upwards to near 60 knots. 60 knot southwest winds coming on shore parts of the northern southeast panhandle. And then dropping down to 9,000 feet, we see that mid-level ridge of high pressure anchored there across the Yukon Valley, covering and influencing much of the weather throughout the interior part of the state. About the only winds across the Alaska Peninsula coming in from the southeast at about 35 knots, and then turning southerly upwards to 30 knots there just south of St. Lawrence Island. And then dropping down to 30,000 feet, we have a few weak low-pressure circulations there just south of the Gulf of Alaska, south of the Alaska Peninsula, and back out south of the Aleutian Chain, to the south of the Aleutian Chain in the North Pacific. And a quick check of turbulence. There is a potential for some isolated to considerable moderate turbulence there off the tip of the Alaska Peninsula on Wednesday, mainly between the surface and 4,000 feet. So that does it for your aviation weather. If you are heading out, please check the latest forecast and conditions, and have a safe flight.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, and today I'm privileged to introduce Dr. Uccellini, the Director of the United States National Weather Service. Welcome back to Alaska, sir.
Thank you, Dave. Glad to be here.
Thanks. Prior to being the leader of the National Weather Service, your work included an extensive look at snowstorms across the northeastern United States. These are the types of storms that can bring some of the country's largest cities to its knees. Tell me a little bit about your fascination with snow.
Well, as far back as I can remember, I've always been interested in weather, growing up as a kid on Long Island, New York, and was particularly fascinated by snowstorms, why they occurred. The distribution of snow was very varied across the entire region. The rain-snow line, all those things fascinated me right from the get-go. And I was interested in knowing how they worked, how the forecast worked, or more often than not, didn't work one way or the other. And that drove me, that interest continued to build, and drove me through high school right into college, wanting to be a meteorologist.
Okay, that's a fascinating story, and I think every meteorologist has a weather story like that in some way.
Right.
Due to Alaska's size and proximity to the North Pole, sometimes it's difficult to detect and analyze the weather patterns over Alaska. What's the National Weather Service doing to improve that weather detection?
Well, observations in this type of environment is a big challenge, whether it's from space or from what we call in situ observations from the ground or within the systems. Clearly, satellites have been playing an increasing role in providing the big picture, not only from a visual sense in what you see is occurring, but also from providing the data for numerical models that then are used to actually predict the weather. Alaska is actually pretty well positioned with respect to polar orbiting satellites, since you get a faster return of those satellites over your particular area. And in fact, the polar satellite system is the backbone for the observations that we use in our models, especially our global models, and they're particularly important for observing weather features that affect Alaska.
Alaskans live and die by the weather every day, and one of the strategic goals of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the National Weather Service is to develop a more weather-ready nation. What does it mean for Alaskans to be weather-ready?
Well, the strategic outcome is based on people being ready, responsive, and therefore resilient to the increasing threats to extreme weather events. Those threats are related to not only the nature of the events, but the fact that we're becoming more vulnerable to them as we have more people, more infrastructure that could be affected by these events. So we have to ensure that the observations we make for situational awareness, the forecasts we make for people to take the proper responses, are connected to people's actions, the response to these events, so that they will be more resilient to what's facing them. There are examples with respect to hurricanes. More people living along the coastline takes longer to evacuate. We have to make better forecasts with longer lead times, but we also have to communicate the threat so people will actually take action to avoid those storms. Up here you have, as in other parts of the United States, an increasing threat related to fire. As there are more people living in fire-prone areas, we have to ensure that our forecasts are good, that we don't have false alarms that make people not react to the forecast when in fact they should. But we also have to be able to communicate the threat and make sure that we're working with the partners in the emergency management community so that communities and right down to individuals will actually take the proper responses in the face of these events. So that's the strategic goal. There are a lot of challenges for us in terms of improving forecasts, but also improving our communication skills and linking with the emergency management communities that are actually out there trying to protect lives and mitigate property loss.
So a huge partnership effort going forward.
That's one of the important keys for the success of meeting the strategic goal.
Okay. One of the things you're talking about was understanding the weather information we're getting back from the computers, weather modeling, and you did a lot of work with that in some of your prior positions with the Environmental Prediction Center there, the National Center for Environmental Prediction. What can you tell us about recent improvements in that weather modeling? And you were using the polar orbiters as kind of a source of information that started that process.
Well, first of all, we have to recognize that everything you see, you read and hear about weather, climate, or ocean forecasts are all driven by numerical models. Now, it really has been the revolution in our forecast process in the last part of the 20th century. The success of that numerical enterprise is based on three factors: big computers, global data, not just local data, but you have to have a global data set, and then the models themselves, the science that's behind the models and in running the models in an operational mode. So we're working to improve all three of those components. We upgraded our computers last year. We're going through another upgrade even as I speak. We'll be upgrading from 200 trillion calculations per second to 700 trillion calculations per second by January of 2015. This increase in the computer will allow us to run what we call Earth system models. It's not just the atmosphere, it's the atmosphere, ocean, ice, which is obviously very important up here, and land models that are all coupled together at higher resolution. So you need the big computers, you need the science that allows us to run these models and run them in a parallel mode, and that they're coupled so that the ocean effects could affect the atmosphere and vice versa, as an example. And then the global observations are absolutely critical, and over the last 20, 30 years they've become more dependent upon the satellite systems, and especially the polar orbiting satellites, which help drive the observations needed for those models, whether they be atmospheric observations, land, ice observations. We're deriving more and more of that from satellites now that feed into these models and produce forecasts with extended lead times. Now out, for extreme events especially, we're seeing much improved forecast out in the 4, 5, 6, 7, and even 8-day range, which gets us back to Weather Ready Nation, because if you're going to get ready for a storm event, you want those consistent forecasts approaching that event from day 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, so you can take the actions several days in advance that can help mitigate the property loss and protect your livelihood.
Okay, all part of the mission of protecting life and property. Dr. Uccellini, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and speaking to Alaskans and sharing how the National Weather Service is working for Alaska and the nation. Wish you safe travels around the 49th. Enjoy your time here, sir. And for Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
We'll start out the marine weather segment, as usual, with the ice edge, and you'll see that there's still a little bit of ice left in Norton Sound, as well as northwest and north of St. Lawrence Island. Otherwise, the Bering Sea is open, and as we cross through the Bering Strait up into the lower Chukchi Sea, a lot of open water there. Still ice, though, in Kotzebue Sound, and the ice is breaking up there along the northwest coast as you go north and east of Cape Lisburne. And then certainly along the Arctic coast, still some ice, but the process will continue now as we are heading into summer with a high sun angle and warmer temperatures. I'll look at Wednesday's marine forecast for the southeast panhandle, the inner canals. We're looking at winds from the southeast and south, 10 to 15 knots. Waves generally 2 to 3 feet at most. And along the Gulf side, coastal areas, southeast winds 20 to 25 knots, swells around 5 to 6 feet, generally speaking, from Craig northward to Yakutat. And for Thursday, the inner waterways will see winds from the south-southeast only at 5 to 10 knots and waves a foot or two. And then on the Gulf Coast, we are looking at winds from the south at 15 knots on the south end, turning more toward the southeast and then east, especially west of Yakutat. And swells will generally be right around 7 feet. For south central areas, the overall wind flow across the Gulf is out of the east. At Prince William Sound east at 15 knots, waves couple to 2 to 3 feet. Off the Kenai, 3 to 4 feet. And then in Cook Inlet, winds will be out of the southeast to south. The mouth of Cook Inlet could see 4 to 5 footers with southeasterly winds up to 20 knots. And then on Thursday, the winds across the region will generally develop more of a north-northeast component. And there in Prince William Sound, 10-knot northeast winds, waves a couple of feet. And also that from Anchorage down toward the Kenai, north winds 10 knots, waves a couple of feet. But as you get out toward and off of the Kenai and Kodiak Island, winds will be generally out of the east-northeast, 15 upwards to 25 knots, and swells of 4 to 6 feet. Across the southwest peninsula, and up through Kodiak Island, winds will be out of the east, generally speaking, and swells 6 to 8 feet off of Kodiak Island and the North Pacific side of the peninsula, and out of the east at 10 to 20 knots and waves of 2 to 4 feet on the Bering side. On Thursday, winds generally will be out of the northeast across the region at 15 to 20 knots, though some channeling there at Shelikof Strait with some 6-foot waves. And as you go down the lake on the Pacific side, generally swells running about 6 feet and only 1 to 3 feet on the Bering side. Across the Aleutian chain, winds will be out of the northeast, at least there around Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, with 6 to 8 foot swells on the Pacific side, but 4 to 5 feet on the Bering side, and then winds out toward the western Aleutians, Kiska and Shimia will generally be out of the north and east at 15 knots and swells about 4 feet. On Thursday, winds will generally be from the northeast across the eastern Aleutians, 15 to 20 knots, waves 5 to 6 feet either side, Bering or Pacific, and more out of the north at 15 to 20 knots west of Adak through Kiska and Shimia, and waves about 5 feet. Western and southwest areas off the coast, we are looking at winds from the southeast 10 to 15 knots, waves 3 to 4 feet, and then coming up there through areas Makoriak on up toward Imanak, southeasterly winds 10 to 15 knots, waves a couple of feet. Still some ice there though around Norton Sound. And then winds will generally be out of the east, south of Hooper Bay, down through St. Paul and St. George at 10 to 15 knots, waves a few feet, and more out of the north-northeast from Norton Sound down to between St. Lawrence and Hooper Bay, with waves running a couple feet. Along the Arctic coast, winds will generally be out of the southwest, 10 to 15 knots, with still areas of ice, but as you get in the open waters off the northwest coast there in the lower Chukchi Sea, winds will be south at 20 to 25 knots, waves 4 to 5 feet. And then on Thursday, winds will turn a little more easterly along the Arctic coast at 10 to 15 knots, with still areas of ice, but they're remaining from the south at 15 to 20 knots and waves 3 to 4 feet down toward and off of Kotzebue Sound. And a quick check of the surface weather map shows interior Alaska, weak low pressure with a couple areas of low pressure south of the Gulf and extending back toward south of the Southwest Peninsula here during the day on Wednesday. So thank you for watching our show, and be sure to join us again tomorrow.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.